name is Adam Krieger. I am with Warren Township Youth and Family Services here in Gurnee, Illinois. And I know probably many of you checking with us this evening are local, but some may be coming from elsewhere. In a moment, we'll get started with our workshop, Don't Try Harder, Try Different, Managing Anxiety and Stress. And I'll tell you a little bit about our presenter in just a moment, but first a few quick words about youth services. So for those of you who do live in Warren Township Youth Services provides free counseling services to children, families with children birth to 17, and then young adults 18 to 25. All of our services at this time are virtual. We also do parenting classes for parents who have children with anxiety, children with ADHD. We do parenting classes in both English and Spanish. And then we'll also be having some workshops coming up very soon as well. On December 3rd, we'll have a new workshop called Parenting While Grieving During COVID and Beyond. That'll actually be presented by staff from Willow House. So with no further ado, we'll get started with our workshop this evening. Oh, I'm sorry, one other quick piece of business. The workshop will go till 7:30, and what we'll do is if you have any questions, please use the chat line to make those to send me those questions. And then what Dr. McGrath will do is throughout the presentation, he'll take some breaks, and then I'll feed him the questions. So just go ahead and send those in whenever you want to. So let me introduce you to our speaker. Dr. Patrick McGrath currently serves as the head of clinical services as NO-CD, leading their teletherapy services across the United States to help people with OCD. He is also a lead psychologist at Amita Health, where he opened the intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization, and residential treatment programs for anxiety disorders, OCD, and PTSD. He is also the president of Anxiety Centers of America, a private practice group, and a member of the Scientific and Clinical Advisory Board of the International OCD Foundation. He is a fellow of the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies and the president of OCD Midwest. So with no further ado, Patrick McGrath.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. Happy to be here and looking forward to tonight. I know none of you are stressed at all, so this will probably just be redundant and nothing that anyone's too interested in. But, for those of you who might be experiencing some form of stressor in your life or in your world, we'll see if any of this kind of resonates with you. I want to start off with maybe just kind of a funny, because, it's always good to have something fun that we all do. So.
Dr. Switzer?
Yes, come in. I'm just washing my hands.
I'm Catherine Bigman. Janet Carlisle referred me.
Oh, yes. Fear of being buried alive in a box.
Yes, that's me. Should I lay down?
Oh, no, we don't do that anymore. Just have a seat. And let me tell you a bit about our billing. I charge $5 for the first 5 minutes, and then absolutely nothing after that. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Too good to be true, as a matter of fact.
Well, I can almost guarantee you that our session won't last the full 5 minutes. Now, we don't do any insurance billing, so you would either have to pay in cash or by check.
Wow. Okay.
And I don't make change.
All right.
And go.
Go.
Well, tell
What?
me about the problem that you wish to address.
Oh, okay. Well, I have this fear of being buried alive in a box. I start thinking about being buried alive, and I begin to panic.
Has anyone ever tried to bury you alive in a box?
No, but truly thinking about it does make my life horrible. I mean, I can't go through tunnels or be in an elevator or in a house, anything boxy.
So what you're saying is you're claustrophobic.
Yes, that's it.
All right, well, let's go, Catherine. I'm going to say two words to you right now. I want you to listen to them very, very carefully. Then I want you to take them out of the office with you and incorporate them into your life.
Well, shall I write them down?
Well, if it makes you comfortable, it's just two words. We find most people can remember them.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay, here they are. Stop it!
I'm sorry?
Stop it!
Stop it?
Yes, S-T-O-P, new word, I-T.
So, what are you saying?
You know, it's funny. I say two simple words, and I cannot tell you the amount of people who say exactly the same thing you're saying. I mean, this is not Yiddish, Catherine. This is English. Stop it.
So, I should just stop it.
There you go. I mean, you don't want to go through life being scared of being buried alive in a box, do you? I mean, that sounds frightening.
It is.
Then stop it.
I can't. I mean, it's been with me since childhood.
No, we don't go there. Just stop it.
So, I should just stop being afraid of being buried alive in a box.
You got it. Good go. Well, it's only been...
Now, how many of us have said that to someone we love, someone who's anxious, that we've wanted them to just stop it, right? We wanted them to just knock it off, or, hey, get that thought out of your head, or don't think that anymore, or any of that. And I wonder if any of you have ever been successful in telling somebody not to think of something, and that person then saying, oh, you know what? Thanks for reminding me not to think of that. I forgot to not think of it. And now that you have told me not to think of it, I'll be sure not to think of it anymore. I'm going to bet that's never actually worked. And so what we want to talk about tonight is new ways of taking a look at how do we deal with stress and anxiety, and how do we not get caught in this notion that we can talk somebody out of being nervous or anxious or stressed or afraid. I've never once in 21 years of treating anxiety disorders been able to talk anybody out of being afraid of something. I behave people out of being afraid of something, do that all of the time, but I've never once talked anybody out of something. So we'll focus tonight specifically on what are some things and beliefs that people hold on to that really keep them stuck and that get in the way of people making the behavioral changes that they need to do. And I want to teach all of you as parents potentially, or as providers if you're out there, or as teachers, or even if you're somebody who's a student who yourself has some anxiety, what are some things that you can start looking at after tonight that might help to make some changes in the conversations that you have with the person who's anxious, or the conversations maybe you have with yourself, and lead you to doing some good behavioral change that will actually assist you get through the experiences that you find to be very difficult. So let's talk a little bit about fear, because it's really important to take a look at how is it that we experience fear. And there really are some basic fears to take a look at. So one might be a threat to our physical status. COVID's a good example of that, right? If you don't, wash your hands for a certain amount of time, or do all sorts of other kind of things that, and believe me, there's so much misinformation out there. You don't do all of these things, then you're going to get COVID, right? So all sorts of debates on, should we wash our groceries down? What about the delivery guy or woman? Do I leave it on the porch for 5 days to make sure that there's no viruses on it or anything before I bring it inside of my house? And I have patients who do that, who don't open things for 2 weeks, or who get groceries delivered, and other than the things that need to go in the refrigerator, the rest of the groceries sit in the bag for 2 weeks just to make sure that nothing's alive on them. That is the physical status threat to ourselves, right? But we can also be afraid of the physical status of others. What if I were to harm someone? What if I were responsible for passing the virus on to them? Or I've seen in school, especially with kids, what if What if while walking down the hall I tripped somebody? I don't remember anybody falling, but what if I did do that? What if I somehow harmed someone, right? And you'll see all of these things that people are afraid of that involved either them becoming harmed, which could be by a germ and contamination issues, but could be I don't want to drive on a day that I see a yellow car because one day we were driving and we got hit by a yellow car and now I'm afraid of yellow cars. So I don't want to drive if I see a yellow car on the road. I want to turn around and go back home because I know that yellow cars are dangerous. All from that all the way to, while we were driving, we hit a pothole. And how do we know that it was a pothole, not a person? Maybe we should drive around the block and just see, just to make sure 100% that we didn't do something that would be bad or wrong. This could also be out of almost, shall we say, a combination of what we'll talk about later, this idea of spiritual issues. Somebody could be harmed if I don't say a prayer the right way or do some kind of religious offering in the correct way. And I don't want to be responsible for some harm coming to somebody. So I have to do these certain kinds of things the right way. Why do I check the doors all the time? Because I have to make sure they're locked, because if they're not locked, somebody could come in and break into the home and they could harm our family or steal our dog or something like that. So I'm responsible for the health and safety of everybody else by doing all of the things that I do. So family, you should actually appreciate all of the checking and all of the stuff that I do all the time, because I'm doing it to keep all of us safe, and myself as well too. Maybe there's a threat to our mental status. What if I somehow, switch personalities with somebody else, or switch my intelligence with someone else? And I get, as I'm saying that to all of you, that might sound kind of odd or ridiculous, but when people have obsessive compulsive disorder, nothing is odd or ridiculous anymore. All of it is a potential. And if it's a potential, then it could happen, because we often in anxiety disorders confuse this idea of possibility versus probability. And therefore, if something is possible, it is definitely probable. It is going to occur. And we just have to wait for it, because we know that this thing is going to happen. So I could go crazy. I could lose control. What if I become a person who has a psychotic disorder or schizophrenia or something like that? I need to constantly check my mental status to make sure that I'm okay. I need to check my intelligence constantly to be sure that I haven't lost my intelligence, or else what will I be, or who will I be if I'm not my personality or my intelligence or something of that nature? There could be a threat to my social status. What if I'm judged or evaluated? Right? What if somebody doesn't like me? What if somebody thinks something bad about me? What if I made a mistake? Wouldn't that be just the worst thing ever, to make a mistake and be judged by other people, and people think that I'm stupid or bad or wrong or awful or horrible or something of that nature? And so the best thing that I could potentially do will be to make sure that I'm never judged by anybody. So maybe it's best just not to go to school, because then I can't be judged. Or if we're in COVID times, I don't want to turn my camera on, because how do I know if somebody's looking at me or not looking at me? And they could be judging me or evaluating me, right? Or maybe I think our house isn't as nice as some of the other houses. And if they see in the background what our house looks like, people might judge me for that. And there's nothing that I can do about it, because we don't have as much money as the other people do, or some of those kinds of natures as well. So whatever I can do to avoid any form of judgment where I might be ridiculed or subjected to being compared to other people, it would be best to avoid all of those things as much as I possibly can. And finally, there's a threat potentially to our spiritual status. What if I do something wrong morally or ethically? What if I offend a higher power? What if I pray wrong and it's rejected? I don't have any faith whatsoever, but I'm going to say prayers anyway, just in case, even though I know that there is no God, but I'm going to say a prayer anyway, just to make sure, just to cover all the bases. Or I'm very much believe in the religion I have, but I say prayers to other religions too, just in case, right? And so you'll get all of those types of things that people will do as well. There's a couple of distortions that come along with this as well, too. Number one is the severity distortion. This is going to be the worst thing in the world. I'm going to die. It's going to be awful and horrible. And when we see this happen, it is people jumping to that worst case scenario. And that's important to remember because anxiety disorders love the all or nothing experience. Anxiety doesn't live anywhere in the middle. Anxiety lives in the extremes. You're either safe or you're in danger. There's no middle ground, right? You're either going to be harmed or you're not going to be harmed. Anxiety hates maybe. It does not like that. It does not do well. It's either you're going to be harmed, so do something to prevent it, or you're not going to be harmed and you're safe, and therefore you don't need to do something. But the whole middle ground thing, anxiety hates very, very much. And as we said, this idea of possibility versus probability, the probability is it definitely will happen. There's no doubt about it. It's absolutely going to occur. And you could say to somebody, well, then why hasn't it happened yet? And their response will be, well, I've just been very lucky up until today, but I know today is the day that the bad thing's going to occur. So that would be something to really pay attention to, that now is the bad day. So here's the interesting piece. People who are really stressed and anxious hate the day that something bad happens. And they also hate the day that something bad doesn't happen. Because the day something bad happens, they say, see, I told you, I knew it was coming. There it is. And the day something bad doesn't happen, they say, whew, I barely made it through today. And now that I barely made it through today, I know tomorrow's going to be the day, because there's no way that I could survive another day like today. I mean, I can't understand how that bad thing didn't happen today. So it's definitely going to be happening tomorrow. And that's where people stay very, very stuck. And then there's this idea of efficacy, this belief that I won't be able to handle something. And as long as I hold on to the belief that I won't be able to handle it, I'm always going to be trying to do something that's going to allow me to feel like I can handle it. And I'm going to be constantly scratching it and grabbing at straws, trying to get all of the answers that I possibly can about how to handle something. And when you have an anxiety disorder, every answer you get isn't quite good enough. It's not quite right. So you need to ask more people and get more reassurance and do more distractions and avoid more and more things in order to feel better, because you don't believe that you can handle the anxiety that you're experiencing. Now, of course, we could handle it, but we don't believe that we could. And so that's very important to kind of recognize that I'm not necessarily talking about reality here in the sense of what is happening or not happening. I'm talking about anxiety reality, and anxiety reality lives in two words. And those two words are what if, followed by the worst case scenario that you can think of. So as long as you can what if something, you can be anxious about it, right? And everything can be going great, but you might have that one kid in your family who goes, but what if this, and what if that, and what if, and it drives you nuts after a while, because all they do is think about all the bad things that can happen. But they're kind of wired that way, to be kind of thinking, not in the moment of what's happening now, but worried about the past and how it might come back to haunt them, and worried about the future and how it's unpredictable and they don't know what's going to happen. So they live in this what if world of trying to always be prepared for something. And that can get really, really exhausting after a while. So I'll pause there for a second, and Adam, just check in with you to see if we have any questions or anything like that before we go into our don't try hard or try different.
We don't have any questions yet, so I think we're off to a great start.
Okay.
And we've got about 40 people with us.
Wonderful. Well, yeah. Welcome to the 40. We'll start with the word should, and we can also think about the words must and always and have to and need to. But let me ask all of you, when was the last time any of you used the word should to describe something that went well? I'll give you a moment to think about that to see if anybody has any notions on that. But I'm going to bet that you haven't, because should is almost always negative. I should have done this and I shouldn't have done that. They should have said this. They shouldn't have said that. It should have been this way. It shouldn't have been that way. I tell people to stop shoulding all over the place, because the shoulds are so very, very negative and rule people's lives. We don't really see positive shoulds, right? They're just negative kinds of things. And I like to tell people this idea that should is an opinion. Just because you think something should be a certain way does not mean that anybody else will think that it is that way, right? So that's really kind of important to pay attention to. So like right here, we've got our bullseye, right? And we can see on the bullseye, we've got the arrow hitting right there in the bullseye. Now, what if the arrow hit here or here or here on the target? Well, those might be really good shots, right? But if it hits here, that's bad. And if it here, wrong. And if it hit here, that's awful or horrible, because it should hit in the middle. And if you don't hit in the middle, then you didn't do what you should do. You did what you shouldn't do, actually, which was hit anywhere but the middle. Now, if you have someone in your family who's really anxious, they're going to look at life as if, unless it's on the bullseye, I failed. I didn't hit it where it should hit, right? Now, I'm not saying that families make that happen, right? There are some families who say, hey, we've never pressured our kid ever in his or her life. We're happy if they do the best that they can, and whatever grade they get, we appreciate the fact that they tried. But there are kids who, no matter what that family life might have been like, who have decided the only thing that's acceptable is the perfect grade. And if it's not perfect, it's awful, it's horrible. I'm first or I'm last. There is nothing in the middle whatsoever. Sometimes these are the kids who turn their test in first because they think that that's a sign of intelligence, that their test got handed in first. Unfortunately, they get sometimes the worst grade on the test because they would rather hurry up and get it done to look good in front of their class than be thinking about what the grade is going to be for it later on when it comes back, right? So I want to teach people to watch out for the shoulds and to think more in terms of I wish, I want, I hope for, it would be nice if, I'm working toward, my goal is, I would like, and doing things like that instead of should, must, ought, have to, and need to. Because the shoulds definitely get in the way, right? And that is, again, why I say to people all the time, stop shoulding all over the place. It's not serving you well. Now, how do you challenge this, right? Well, first of all, if you've got a kid or someone in your family who uses these words all the time, you stop the conversation right there when they say it. So if somebody says, yes, but I should have gotten 100. Hold on, try again. Okay, I wanted to get 100. All right, let's talk about that. You wanted to get 100. That's much more of a conversation to have with somebody than I should have gotten 100. Because when you say, why should you have got 100? They say, because I should, right? The should becomes its own answer in these types of things. I wanted to get 100. Why? Well, because then everybody would have liked me. Okay, so do people only like you if you get 100, or could people like you if you got a 99? I don't know. What did your friends get? They didn't get 100. Do you like them? I do. Why? And break some of these things down, right? So again, as I said before, I don't talk people out of being anxious in the sense that I'm not going to tell them it's okay to not get 100 and then believe it. I have to show them that, hey, guess what? Your behavior tells me that you like other people who don't get 100. Why would it be different for you? We'll get to that a little bit more as we go along, but keep that kind of in mind as we're talking here today. Okay. All right. Number 2, can't versus won't. If you tell me that you can't do something, then that's exactly what's going to happen. You are not going to do it, right? Now, people who are anxious love to tell me all day long about all of the things that they can't do. I can't do this and I can't do that. And I can't. They have no evidence to the fact that that's actually the case, but they sure do say it all of the time. And what I like to tell them then is that, well, here's the problem. If you can't do it, then no therapist or medication will ever be able to help you with it. You know why? Because there's nothing they can do to help you with something that you can't do. Can't means that you lack the ability to do something. And if you lack the ability to do something, there's nothing that anybody can do. You don't give people abilities. They develop abilities, they work on them or something of that nature. But it's not like you can just one day say, oh, now I suddenly have the ability to do something, right? So you have to start paying attention to how many times do your kids say the word can't? And do you challenge them on that every time that they say it, or do you let it go? Because if you let it go, then you've passively accepted the can't. You've said, you know what, you're right. I believe you. You can't handle that. You can't deal with it. You can't do it. Now, stress and anxiety have nothing at all to do with things that you can't do. They're all about things that you won't do, right? So I once had someone come into my office and say to me, Dr. McGrath, I can't get on an elevator. And I said, all right, well, that's interesting. Why don't we go down the hall here to the elevator? And I want to do a test. So I went with them down to the elevator and I pressed the button and the elevator door opened. And I said to them, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to watch you bounce off the invisible force field that appears in front of the elevator. And they said to me, what are you talking about? I said, well, here's the deal. Getting onto an elevator involves walking, which I've seen you do. You've walked over here. And it involves walking through a doorway, which you've done because you walked into the building. There's a doorway there. You walked in and out of my office. There's doorways there. I know that you can walk, and I know that you can walk through doorways, which is exactly what you would need to do to get onto an elevator. Therefore, the only reason why you can't get on the elevator must be that there's an invisible force field that's preventing you from getting on the elevator. And I think watching you bounce off that force field would be hysterical. Go. And then they look at me and say, I hate you. And then they say, fine, I can get on the elevator, but I don't want to. I say, all right, that we can work on. All right, let's figure that out. How can we get you to get onto the elevator? Well, first we might do all sorts of little baby steps to getting on the elevator. Might be just stare inside of the elevator for a while and get used to looking in an elevator. We might even watch the elevator go up and come back down and see people getting on and off of it and recognize that no one's on fire or bloody or anything of that nature. And then we might even open the elevator door and put one foot on the elevator, but keep one foot on the floor, right? And do that for a little bit until they're used to that. And then we might get in the elevator, let the door close, but hit that open door button right away. And then they can get back off again. And then we might just sit in the elevator and I might lock it just so that we don't move, right? We stay there. And then we'll go one floor and we'll get off. And then we'll kind of practice doing one floor at a time. And then we'll do 2 floors and we'll just slowly and gradually build to that whole entire experience. Okay. And I want to show people that they can do things. It's their own anxiety that's leading them to not do it because they won't do it because they're afraid. Well, understandable. There's lots of things that people won't do because they're afraid. But when that gets to a point where they start to believe that they can't do it, then we start getting potentially into an anxiety disorder issue. And now they think, or they say that to everybody else. And then if everyone else starts believing it, then it's an entire family crisis. Little Jimmy just can't get onto Zoom and do school. Well, Jimmy can get onto Zoom and do school. Jimmy won't get on to Zoom and do school because Jimmy's afraid of something. And so we need to work with Jimmy on figuring out what is Jimmy afraid of so that Jimmy will get onto Zoom and will do school. Okay. Number 3, practice makes what? I want all of you to think about that for a moment. What do you think it makes? Of course, the phrase that we typically hear is practice makes perfect, but practice does not make perfect, because if practice made perfect, then you would just need to practice things and everybody would be perfect at it. Nobody would ever trip because we'd all practiced walking long enough. No one would ever fall or break any bones. No car accidents would occur. Only if you were a driver under a year, those would be the only person that would cause or get into car accidents. And now they may cause it with people who are older, but we know that that's not the case, right? If practice made perfect, 99-year-olds would be the best drivers in the world because they'd been doing it longer than anybody else. Or I'll even ask you, name the perfect appetizer. And you may think, nachos, you might think cheese sticks, you might think potato skins, you could think jalapeno poppers. It is, of course, the bacon wrapped scallop is the best appetizer in the world. But if there was a perfect appetizer, everybody would have said the same one, because why would anybody like anything that wasn't the perfect appetizer? So what does that tell us? A couple of things. Number 1, practice makes routine, not perfect. We'll get to that in a second. But it also tells us that perfect is an opinion. Nobody has the right idea about what perfect is. Perfect is an opinion. Now, what do I mean by practice makes routine? The more you practice something, the more you like, or the more you will do that thing again in the future. So if you practice shooting free throws a certain way, that will become your routine. If you practice your golf swing a certain way, that will become your routine. If you practice studying a certain way, that will become your routine. If you practice Zoom calls a certain way, that will become your routine. The beauty of routines are routines can be modified. We can make changes to routines. Some routines work for us and some routines do not. The goal of therapy is going to be to help modify the routines that are not working for you so that you start to find and develop routines that are working for you. Because the routines that are not working for you don't need to stick around. They have no purpose whatsoever. Now, why would somebody continue to do something that isn't working? Very simple. It's comfortable and it's familiar and it feels safe because they're used to it and it's predictable. And yet, it might be horrible for us, right? And sometimes just stopping something is difficult. I've met plenty of people who smoke cigarettes who say, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done and I hate these darn things, but quitting it is harder than anything else in the world, right? Now, smoking is their routine, and they know that smoking is a horrible, horrible thing to do health-wise and smell-wise and all sorts of things, and yet they continue to smoke. So if it was easy to change routines, all we would have to do is tell people to stop it. We'll go back to that video, right? Hey, just stop smoking. Hey, just stop turning your camera off during Zoom. Oh, okay. You know what? I never thought about that. Thank you so much. I'm just going to stop that. That's great. No, changing routines can be some of the most difficult things in the world. And that's why I see myself kind of like a coach, because let's say that you were coached a certain way to throw a baseball, and now you switch teams and there's a new pitching coach. They might teach you an entirely new way to throw a baseball. You've got to break your old routine and you've got to learn a new routine, right? So that's very important to kind of recognize, is that the goal is to develop routines that work for us and not routines that get in the way. Now, one other piece, going back to perfect. There is no such thing as perfect. Perfect does not exist. Perfect is an opinion. And if your goal is to be perfect, you have failed before you have even started. And therefore, you will not achieve what it is you are hoping to achieve because you are trying to achieve something that is unachievable. Okay. Why do I say this? Well, just because you think something was perfect doesn't mean anybody else does, right? Let's say that I have a twin brother and we're judging a speech contest. And my twin brother likes when you give a speech that is read word for word from a piece of paper. And I like when you give a speech that is made up as you go along. And the two of us are judging. The best grade you're going to get is a 50%. Because if you do it his way and not my way, he'll give you 100, but I'll give you a 0. If you do it my way, but not his way, I'll give you 100, but he'll give you a 0. 50% is the best you're going to do in this situation. And you can plead and beg and everything, but no, we are very much sticklers on doing things the way that we do them. So you cannot do it perfectly in that situation. What should you do then? You're going to have to do something that isn't perfect. And that can be very, very difficult for people, to do something that isn't perfect. And yet, so very important to practice, right? We also have different ideas about what perfect, quote unquote, is in any given situation. You know, we pay baseball players millions of dollars to hopefully hit a ball 3 or 4 out of 10 times that one is pitched to them. That's it. And hit a ball and get on base 3 or 4 out of every 10 times they are up to bat. Imagine if we paid your kid's school bus driver that much money to only get 3 or 4 of the per 10 children home to the right house at the right time without getting into an accident. So we pay people minimal dollars to take care of all of your children, and we expect them to get home every single day at a certain time and have the right children delivered to the right homes without any mistakes for an entire year. But then we'll watch somebody on TV and see them as our hero when they can only do something 3 out of 10 times. It is the way that we do things, right? So, practice makes routine. Perfect. And the goal of perfection is going to lead to failure and disappointment. Adam, how we doing out there? Any questions or anything coming along? Or?
No, we're doing great. We don't have any questions at this point.
I have mesmerized the audience. Wonderful. Thank you all for that. Okay. Our next one is control is an illusion. Now, let me ask all of you, what are the 3 things that we can control or be in total control of? If anyone wants to, I'm going to pull up the chat actually so I can see. If anybody wants to try to type in your idea of what are the 3 things you think that we can be in total control of, I would be interested to see if anybody has any ideas on that. Yourself. Okay. That's one thing. Anyone else have any ideas? I'll just give a moment to see if anybody else wants to type anything. Your actions. All right. Very good. Your thoughts. Okay. Good. Wonderful. Thank you all for thoughts, actions, and emotions. Very good. Very good. So let's see if anybody is in total control of all of those things. So we'll start with thoughts. All right, everyone ready? Don't think of a pink elephant. Have no pink elephant thoughts whatsoever. Do not picture a pink elephant in your head. Stop thinking of pink elephants now. I'm going to bet almost all of you thought of a pink elephant, even though I told you not to, which means you do not have thought control. Let's go to emotions. After today's talk, never be anxious ever again for the rest of your life about anything, or sad about anything either. Only be happy. Only smile all day long. That's probably not going to work either. So we don't have total control over our feelings or our emotions. And in terms of actions, for the next 48 hours, do not blink your eyes. Keep them open. No blinking at all. And I'll bet that you're going to blink. In fact, as far as I know, the record for not blinking is about 9.5 minutes. So if we're not in total control of the way we think and the way that we feel and the way that we behave, I would contend that control is an illusion, that there is no such thing as total control. We can have some control over things, but there is just no way that we are ever going to be in total control of anything. Now, this bugs so many people who hate this notion that they are not in total control over anything. Because why do we want to be in control? It feels good, right? Control works for us. Nothing bad could happen. Nothing will surprise us, right? And how do we often attempt to be in control? We worry. And what functions do worry serve? They serve 2 functions. The first one is, if I worry hard enough, I can prevent things from happening. Now, I remember being 16 years old, driving my mom and dad's Delta 88 Oldsmobile around the city of Chicago, and I would come home and my parents would be awake, of course, and my dad would say, "Is the car okay?" I'd say, "Yes," and my mom would say, "Are you okay?" And I would say, "Yes," and then she would say, "See, it's a good thing that I was worrying about you," as if somehow her worries prevented me from getting into a car accident. I was just, of course, an amazingly good driver. Now, I want everyone to follow along here. I want all of you to look up at your ceiling, stare at it, and wish for it to collapse on top of you in the next 10 seconds. Go. All right. Hopefully we didn't lose anyone. My ceiling did not collapse on me. That's about the 847th time that I've done that exercise, and it still has not fallen on me. So it appears that our thoughts don't make things happen. Right? And yet, How many of us worry about so many things? If something pops in our head, it becomes a what if that were to happen? And so now we need to worry about that thing, because what if it were to occur? And maybe I should constantly be preparing for those kinds of things. So think of it like this. If this hand is calm and this hand's anxious, right? And if I'm calm and something, were to happen, that's a big jump, right? But if I'm already worrying about the thing and then the thing happens, well, then it's just a very tiny, small jump. Worry as a buffer that prepares us for the worst case scenario. The problem, of course, is the worst case scenario almost never occurs. And I'm not saying it doesn't ever occur, but it's pretty rare. So we spend a heck of a lot of time worrying about something that almost never happens. So, for example, I will give all of you a homework tonight. I want you to, after this talk, grab your fire extinguisher. I want you to get a chair, sit it beneath one of your smoke detectors. And I would like for you to stay up all night, staring at your smoke detector, waiting for it to go off so that you will be 100% ready and prepared to put out the fire that starts in your house. Now, will anybody do that? Probably not. Yet, you might say, well, my children can't go to play at anybody else's home, and regardless of COVID, because what if they suddenly develop a peanut allergy, and while at that house, they touch a peanut, and then they go into anaphylactic shock, right? So it's just best if we keep everybody here, and other children come to our house, because then I can keep an eye on everything and how everything's going. But I can't keep an eye on everything that's going on over there. It'll be too much of a hassle for me to worry about everything that could potentially happen. So we'll just do everything here to make sure that everything's okay at all times. And that gets overwhelming for people. Absolutely, absolutely overwhelming. Okay. The other thing that happens with worry is if I worry about everything bad that might happen, then I can be prepared for everything bad that might happen. And if I'm prepared for everything bad that might happen, well, then I won't need to worry about it anymore because I've already prepared for it. So I could give you a free trip to Hawaii, and you might say, well, thank you, Dr. McGrath. That's totally awesome. I really appreciate it. How wonderful. Or you might say, well, there could be a fire on the plane and it could go down. I could drown while swimming in the ocean. I could get eaten by a shark. There's a lot of lava there. That would be awful or horrible. What if the hotel blows up or collapses in an earthquake, right? What if I slip while on some rocks at a waterfall and break my neck? What if we do one of those helicopter tours and it crashes on the side of the mountain? I'm not going to go. I'm just going to stay home. I think I'll be fine if I just stay here. And that way I won't have the chance of something bad potentially happening. And this is what we see with worriers who shrink their life more and more out of the fear of what if something could occur and don't actually live their life. I've always loved the phrase, will you spend the rest of your life sitting at your tombstone worrying about when you will be 6 feet under it? Or would you like to spend the rest of your life having a great time partying like a rock star, showing up on the day of your death at your tombstone, wearing a boa and holding a martini in your hand saying, man, that was a great time. And that's what I'd like to do. I think that would be far more fun than sitting around worrying about when the bad thing might actually occur. Okay. You'll also probably notice that the thing that happens is always the thing that you didn't actually prepare for, right? I think about weddings are probably the most planned day of anyone's life. I still haven't been to a wedding yet where something didn't go wrong. So all this time and all this planning put into it, and still something went haywire, right? So we're not in control. It's an illusion. But boy, do people not like that idea, right? They want to be in control. People also believe that they're special and that the rules of the world apply to them differently than they do to the other 8.5 billion people that live on the planet. So I'm going to give you a homework tonight because I don't think you're going to do the fire extinguisher. And the homework tonight is this. I want you to treat yourself tomorrow as if you were your very best friend or most cherished loved one. So starting tomorrow morning when you wake up, I want you to wake up and say, I'm just the best person I've ever met. I just really like me a lot. It's going to be a great day. And then anytime anything goes well, say to yourself, that was great of me. What a nice job I did there. That was absolutely wonderful. And anytime anything goes wrong, say, who cares? Nobody noticed. It's no big deal. Whatever. And see how you feel at the end of the day. Because frankly, that's how you treat the people you love and the people you really respect. And then, so that's for Tuesday. Wednesday, I want you to treat everybody you know like you normally treat yourself. So on Wednesday, anytime anybody you know does anything wrong, go up to them and say, well, that was luck. I mean, it's not like you actually deserved that or anything. And of course, now that something good happens, something bad's bound to happen. So you better be careful because karma's really, really a pain in the butt. And, anytime anything goes wrong, go up and say, wow, that was really stupid of you. I can't believe you did that. You really are quite a moron. You should probably quit your job and maybe hide in a cave somewhere for the rest of your life because obviously nobody wants to be around you anymore. And see if anyone will ever speak to you again for the rest of your life after Wednesday. So maybe Wednesday don't actually do that, but hopefully you get the point. We are wonderfully good at motivating other people, and we are pretty darn awful and horrible at motivating ourselves. Now, I say this because we have to take a look at, especially when we're working with children, how do we motivate our kids, right? What are the things that we can do to help motivate them? And how do we also make sure that they are motivating themselves? Are they talking to themselves as if they like themselves, or are they beating themselves up, hoping that that's going to make them better, right? As parents or guardians, set a good example for your children. If you are a person who has anxiety, recognize the fact that by telling yourself of every mistake you've ever made doesn't make you feel better. It actually makes you feel worse. If you take a look at baseball and hitting coaches, when somebody's in a slump, they typically want to take a look at the film of themselves in the slump and try to figure out what's going wrong. But hitting coaches almost exclusively pull tape of when someone was doing really well and tell them to watch this tape and take a look at what you were doing right and not focus on what it was that you were doing wrong. That turns out to be the best thing that you can do in these types of situations. So hopefully that's helpful a little bit, just to give you some idea of the ways to take a look at how can you really be helpful and motivating to someone, because we're really good at putting ourselves down when we wouldn't put anybody else down. So not only do we have to become a cheerleader for the people that we love who are anxious and kind of help change their behavior with that, we have to teach them how to be a cheerleader of themselves as well. Now, I would contend that from an anxiety standpoint, everything is neutral. Nothing's really scary or wonderful or horrible or anything of that nature. Take, for example, if there's an elevator in front of us. Okay, so an elevator door opens and there's 3 people in front of the elevator. Person number 1 is a 4-year-old child. Person number 2 is a woman who works in an office building. Person number 3 is a guy with an elevator phobia. What do 4-year-old kids do when elevator doors open? They typically run in and are very, very excited about the whole experience, right? What do guys with elevator phobias do when elevator doors open? They take the stairs, they freeze, or something like that. What do women who work in office buildings do when elevator doors open? They get on the elevator. They might scornfully look at the child who's just pressed 27 buttons, and now that she has to stop at a bunch of floors, but otherwise she gets on the elevator. So what do we learn from this experience? 3 people just experienced the exact same thing, the elevator door opening. All of them had a different experience of it. One was thinking how awesome it was. One was absolutely indifferent to it. And one was totally afraid of the experience. What does that tell us? Everything that we are anxious about is subject to our perception or opinion or interpretation. Okay. Is school fun? No. Is school fun? Yes. Is school fun? Maybe. It's all of those things, right? Depends on who you're asking. Okay? It's all about the perception. Now, why is that important? Because when I'm doing therapy with somebody, I can't change school, but I can help them change their perception of school. I can't change giving a speech, but I can help them change the perception of giving a speech, right? And if you reverse everything that we've said, you'll get my definition of anxiety, which is when I perceive neutral things in a special way, believing I must control them in order to make them perfect, otherwise I can't handle it, and that's just the way it should be, I get really anxious. I'll say that one more time. When I perceive neutral things in a special way and believe that I must control them in order to make them perfect, otherwise I can't handle it, and that's just the way it should be, I get really anxious. Okay. These are the things that anxious people do. These are the things, as family members, you need to pay attention to. How many should statements are being made? How many can'ts are being said? How many attempts are there at being perfect? How much time is spent trying to be in control of things? How much belief is there that, it's fine for everyone else not to do it, but I have to do it? And how many perceptions are going to the worst case scenario of very neutral things? Those are the things to start paying attention to, because when you pay attention to those, you're also going to then start to notice what are the things that maintain stress. And those things are safety-seeking behaviors. And these are the 5 safety-seeking behaviors that we see occur. Number 1, avoidance. If I'm afraid of something, it would be best to avoid it so that I don't have to deal with it. Number 2, reassurance seeking. I want you to constantly tell me that everything will be fine or okay. I don't trust my own judgment about this thing. I need you to tell me that it will be fine or okay. Number 3 is distraction. Well, I'm doing the thing I'm afraid of, but I'm paying no attention to it because I'm on, social media, or I'm playing a video game or something like that. So, you're not really actually participating or getting anything out of it because you're doing something else that distracts you. Or use of substances because they numb the feelings that I have. And I don't like the feelings that I experience when I do this thing that's anxiety provoking. So I'm going to use these substances to numb the experience so that I don't feel the feels anymore. Or if I have obsessive compulsive disorder, I do compulsions. The compulsions neutralize the obsessions that I have. Now, if you want to stay anxious for the rest of your life, do all of these things. If you want to overcome anxiety, get rid of all of these things. Now, this is important for a minute here to talk about the fact that families often provide these things as a way to help manage anxiety. And out of no wrong intention, I know, unfortunately, families make anxiety worse by providing these very things to people. Okay? That's tough to hear. I get it. Nobody wants to think that they are the one providing something that's actually making things worse over time. But if every night you have a kid who's constantly asking you for reassurance, and you've noticed that every night that conversation gets a little bit longer and a little bit more in depth and a little bit more difficult to have, you participating in that conversation is not helping that child anymore. Okay. Or providing distractions. Or, oh, you're afraid of going to school today because of a test? All right, well, it's fine if you stay home today and have another day of studying, because that's going to make it more likely that it's going to happen again in the future. Now, these things are easy to do and provide, right? And why do they work? Because in the short term, anxious people want to feel good right now. So they do rituals if they have OCD, or they do these safety-seeking behaviors as a way to try to feel as good as they possibly can, right? But they don't help things in the long run. In the long run, you have to practice being anxious and learn that you can handle being anxious, right? That anxiety will dissipate. It will go away, therefore allowing you to learn how to feel better in the long term. Now, let me give you an example. We'll take it out of psychology in terms of anxiety for a second. We'll go into the psychology of substance use. Let's say one of your children was on a detox unit and they were going through withdrawal. And they were amazingly uncomfortable. They were having the shakes. They had a fever. They were throwing up. They couldn't sleep. They just felt worse than they'd ever felt in their life, which is very often what it feels like when you're detoxing from alcohol. And you go visit them and they say, Mom, Dad, could you just go down the street to the liquor store, please, and just get me just a small bottle of vodka so that I could take a drink and stop going through these awful withdrawal symptoms? Hopefully you'd say no. Hopefully you'd say, honey, I feel so horrible that you have to go through this, but this is what you need to do in order to be better. Okay. So let me ask you this. Why is it okay for your child to be physically uncomfortable now in order to be better later, but it's not okay for them to be emotionally uncomfortable now in order to be better later? Because the therapy that we do for anxiety disorders is to purposely put people into uncomfortable situations and teach them that they can handle it. And we do that without doing something to distract them, right? I don't teach people to do anything else other than sit in their discomfort and learn that they can handle the discomfort. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but the more you get used to it, the less uncomfortable it is, actually, right? Think about the first time that you drove. It was probably quite uncomfortable. Now you might not even think about driving when you drive. You're just so used to it. But you had to go through the discomfort of doing it first in order to be able to do it. Now, here's what we're talking about in terms of what this all looks like. You experience a fear stimuli, and that leads to a misinterpretation of a threat, and that leads you to being anxious. So you do some type of avoidant coping, and what happens there? Absence of a corrective experience. Now, avoidant coping could be here, reassurance could be here, distraction could be here, substance use could be here, compulsion could be here. For this example, it's an avoidance. So here's our fear stimulus. Charlie Brown and the Peanuts gang go to Great America, and Charlie Brown thinks if I get on a roller coaster, I'm going to die, and that will be awful and horrible, and I can't handle that. That makes me totally anxious. So what am I going to do? I ain't getting on any roller coaster. Even though Linus and Lucy and Peppermint Patty tell me it's fine and everything will be okay, I've got nothing to worry about whatsoever. All will be well. There's no way that I'm getting on the roller coaster. And what happens? I don't die. So what do I learn? Avoiding roller coasters turns out to be a really good thing. I don't die when I avoid roller coasters. Now, you could say, yeah, but everyone else rode them and didn't die. And your answer will be, yeah, well, that's fine. But here comes specialness. It's fine for everybody else to ride it. But if I got on the roller coaster, that would have been the time something bad or awful or horrible would have happened. What do we see here? What do I not learn? I don't learn a corrective experience. I learn that when I avoid something, it turns out well. So therefore, keep on avoiding that thing. And I want to learn something different. I want to teach people something different. I want to teach people very much so that avoidance is the thing that maintains the problem, not gets rid of it. How can you ever overcome the fear of something without actually doing it? If any of you ever figures that out, let me know. We'll write a book together and we will make millions and millions of dollars, because everybody with an anxiety disorder would love, absolutely love, to learn how to overcome the fear of something without ever having to actually do the thing they're afraid of. No one's figured it out yet, but that's what everybody would like to do. Now, how do you overcome something? Like this. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Charlie Brown feels a tap on his shoulder and he looks. It's the redhead girl. And she says, Charlie Brown, will you ride the roller coaster with me? Well, the fear stimulus is still there riding the roller coaster. He still thinks he's going to die. He still thinks he's anxious, but you know what he's going to do? He's loved that girl for like 30 years in the comic strip, and he's getting on that stupid roller coaster. And what happens? He doesn't die. So what does that do? Adjust his threat appraisal. So when she says, hey, that was fun, let's write another one, he's got a little bit more accurate threat appraisal now. Hopefully he'll have a better adaptive emotional response, and hopefully then he will get better adaptive behavior. Okay. That's what we want to see. That's how it works. We are here to change the way people cope. I can't talk you out of being anxious, but I can behave you out of being anxious. And that's what I do as a therapist, is I behave people out of being anxious. And how do we do that? We do that with a therapy called exposure and response prevention. What do? We purposely expose people to things they are afraid of, and we get them to stop doing safety behaviors. That is how you overcome fear. You don't talk somebody out of being afraid. Somebody has to do something. So what does that mean? You are going to be afraid the first few times you do it. It's just the way that it is. And we get people to make a list of the things they're afraid of. We arrange them in a hierarchy, and we develop this plan to go and do these things slowly and gradually. This is a put a toe in the water and see how it feels experience, not a throw you in the deep end of the pool and learn how to swim experience. Okay. We want people to confront their fears and learn that they can handle that situation. And we're going to assist them to do that along the way. And so if you've got a kid who has an anxiety disorder, you want an exposure and response prevention trained therapist, because that's the person who is going to really put them into situations. Now, I'm just going to be honest, there's a lot of bad therapy out there where therapists will say, oh, we need to create this very comforting environment for your child, and we should never push them into situations that are uncomfortable and everything. And if that's the case, you've got a kid who's going to live in your basement for the next 40 years because you've never pushed them into things that were uncomfortable, right? That kid might not ever walk again, right? Because what if they fall and you say, oh my gosh, falling, it's so awful and horrible. Maybe you should just crawl from now on. And that way you'll never fall again, because you'll be just so close to the ground that if you do stumble a bit, it's just a quick fall. But if you're standing and you fall, that you break things, and that's awful and horrible. Right? We need people to do things that are uncomfortable and learn that they can handle them. Now, let me give you a story about that. I worked with someone, I was working at a college counseling center many years ago. Someone came into my office, it was 2 weeks prior to graduation. And she said, Dr. McGrath, I am graduating in 2 weeks with a major that I hate, and I have a job waiting for me that I have no interest in whatsoever. And I said, well, that sounds awful. How did that happen? And she said, well, I came in my freshman year, and this is one of 10 schools in the country that has the major that I'm majoring in. I was very excited. I took my classes freshman year. And at the end of my first semester freshman year, I was signing up for second semester freshman year courses. And I looked into the course book, and I just decided to take a look at all the other courses that I would take in that major, just to see what I had coming ahead. And I was flipping through, and I saw that in my senior year, second semester, which frankly, she happened to be in when she came to see me. But in my senior year, second semester, I was going to have to take a class that required in it giving a 5-minute presentation. And I saw that. And once I saw that, I started flipping through the course book to find a major that required no speeches whatsoever. And the first major that I found that had no classes with speeches in it, I signed up for. It is now 4 years later. I'm graduating with that major. I've spent these 4 years, and I've spent over $120,000 in tuition to major in something that I actually have no interest in whatsoever. And I only majored in it because it does not have a speech requirement. And I said, well, that sounds horrible. What happened? And I said to her, did you go to high school? She said, I did. I said, did you have speech class in high school? She said, I did. I said, how'd you get through those? She said, well, every teacher either let me do the speech after class, or write the speech out and hand it in, or record the speech and then give her or him the recording. And therefore, I never actually gave a speech the entire time that I was in high school and all the speech classes that I had. And I said, well, then every one of those teachers failed you. By not helping you do something that was uncomfortable and learning how to handle it, you never faced the thing that you were afraid of, and you maintained your worst case scenario thoughts about it to this day. And that is why you continue to be stuck. And until you decide to put yourself into that situation, you will be uncomfortable. And you will avoid and seek reassurance and distract away from those types of situations. Now, that is a true story. And I tell that story, especially when I'm talking to parents and groups of kids, because parents sometimes have the best of intention of not wanting to see their child be uncomfortable. I look at the flip side of that, and I see that as being a very dangerous thing, because I know what happens in the future when people don't learn how to handle the things they're afraid of. I've even had people back when I worked at Alexian Brothers. I opened up our school anxiety and school refusal program there, and people would come in for the interview, and I would tell them all about the program and what we do. And sometimes parents would say, I think just what we're going to do is we're going to do homebound for the next 2 years. And then when they go to college, we're sure that everything will be fine. And I would just hand them my card, and I would say, all right, well, tell you what, here's my card. Call me in 2 years. They're not going to make it to college. And these parents would look at me and they would just have this look on their face like, you're such a jerk. How dare you even assume that my child will not be able to make it to college? You're a horrible person. And then 2 years later, I would get a phone call from them that would say they went to college for about a day or two and then they came back home. So I say it because I see it all the time. You can't learn how to overcome a fear by avoiding something. You can't learn how to overcome a fear about having everyone promise you that you're going to be fine or okay. And you never overcome a fear by distracting or using substances or by doing compulsions. You overcome fears by facing them and learning how to handle them. What do I do all day long with people? I help them stop doing safety behaviors. I put them into situations that are uncomfortable purposely so that they learn how to handle those situations. I hope that helps and gives you a bit of an overview of everything that I've been talking about. And like I had said to Adam, I wanted to leave the last 20 minutes or so open for questions. So we can kind of open that up, Adam, if you like, and take a look at how we want to do that. So
Yeah, let me see.
If you have some, or if people have written some, we can start off there.
Absolutely. Let me take a look here. Okay, so I don't have any questions yet from the audience, but please go ahead and send them in if you do. Actually, it's funny. I have a technical question for you. While we don't have a question yet from the audience, I am curious, how effective is exposure therapy while doing teletherapy? Can you actually do it really effectively?
It is just as effective. There are plenty of studies out already that show that teletherapy is just as effective as inpatient therapy, or in-person therapy, I should say. In fact, I personally like doing it over teletherapy even more than I do in person, because when I was doing it in person, people came to my office and I had to talk to them about what was going on at home. Now in teletherapy, if they're on their phone doing it, I can have them walk around their house and show me all sorts of things that they are afraid of, and I can walk them through doing things specifically to the things they're afraid of. So let's say that they someone asked for the contact info again. So let me pull that up so that people can see it, and we'll share that. There we go. So let's say that somebody is afraid, of did I turn the stove on or off, and that kind of thing. Let's go over to the stove, turn it on. I'll watch you turn it on. I'll watch you turn it off. Now walk away. And now I can do the rest of the session while you're in another room, and not knowing if you actually turned the stove off the right way or not, and not going back and checking it or something like that. So I've really enjoyed being able to do this through the teletherapy experience very much.
That's fantastic. I do have a question here. How do you help clients do accurate threat assessments during COVID, especially when the information about what is safe keeps changing as science improves?
Yeah, I mean, I choose to follow one place for my information, so I kind of go with what the CDC says. So my work with all of my patients has been a 20-second hand wash is what you do when you come in from the outside. And that is basically what we do with people. And when the information changes, I will I will change that information that I give to people. But for right now, I have picked one place to get the information from and use it. There are so many people who get the information from so many different places that it's just very confusing to them. So
So a question I have for you is, and if you had said something at some point, I apologize if I missed it, but um, what is the role of, because I know this was around anxiety and stress. What is the role for mindfulness and some very traditional relaxation techniques? If you have a
sure.
child who's very anxious, what is the role for developing breathing skills? Again, mindfulness, yoga moves, things like that.
I think that those things are fine. I don't teach any of them to people personally, but I also don't say don't do them. What I do say is don't do them while you're doing exposure and response prevention therapy, because otherwise it becomes a distraction. So if I have you exposing to something that's uncomfortable and you're focusing on your diaphragmatic breathing, you're not paying full attention to what it is that you need to be paying attention to, which is the exposure and response prevention exercise. So I just want people to know that when we're doing ERP, we're not going to be doing anything else. If you want to do diaphragmatic breathing and mindfulness and yoga and all those things outside of ERP time, that's great. Go right ahead, do it all, but not while you're doing ERP.
Let me take a look here. Okay, I have. Okay, is there a difference in therapy for anxious children versus adults? Are there pediatric therapists?
ERP we use across the age spectrum. I mean, I do ERP with kids as young as 6 years old currently in my job at NoCD. So uh, how we might present it is different. And we also make sure when we're doing ERP with kids and adolescents that we include the parents into the experience as well too. I'll tell you what, if you want to guarantee watching ERP not work well, teach a child to do an ERP exercise, but not let their parent or guardian know while you're doing it. That happened one time where one of my students was supposed to talk to a parent when they picked up their kid and explain the exercises that we were doing with them. They did not. I got some really nasty voicemails from that family thinking, what are you doing to my kid? And why are you having him do this? This is what they're afraid of. And you're forcing them into it and blah, blah, blah. And of course, we would never force anybody to do anything. That child was willingly doing those exercises, but the parents saw them doing some of those things at home and were just kind of shocked that we were having them do the things that they were afraid of. And they were very angry about it. So it is very important to have the buy-in of the family into doing what we're doing as well. And I try to teach the family exactly how to do ERP and in some ways to become the therapist of the experience so that they can also spot any of the safety seeking behaviors that their children are doing so that they can work with kids on stopping doing those safety seeking behaviors.
Wonderful. I have another great question here. How to deal with a child that is going through an anxiety attack? Any guidance for parents? Some just basic guidance on dealing with an anxiety attack.
Yeah, I basically let the child have the anxiety attack. So think of it like this: if every time your child has an anxiety attack, they get tons of attention from you, whether there is a willingness component or whatever to that anxiety attack in the future, that extra attention is very pleasing to that child, or at least to that child's anxiety. Because remember, anxiety wants comfort as quickly as possible. Once that fight, flight, or freeze response is set off, the goal is to get somewhere or find something that will make you as comfortable as possible, as quickly as possible. So the best thing to do, and this is what I do with anyone who might have an anxiety attack in any programs that we're having or in my office or while we're doing a therapy session, is I just sit with them and I have them kind of stay in the moment and feel the feels and watch that go away on its own. And then guess what we do for therapy for anxiety attacks? we purposely create symptoms of anxiety attacks. We do something called interoceptive exposures, where we run in place and hyperventilate, and we breathe through straws, and we spin in chairs, and we do push-ups, and we teach everybody to handle all of the symptoms of the anxiety attack and learn that they can handle them, that they don't need to be afraid of them, that an anxiety attack is simply a collection of 4 or more symptoms happening at the same time. And no one has ever, as far as we know, died of a panic attack. It has just never actually happened. Is it uncomfortable? Oh, sure, absolutely, 100% uncomfortable. But can you handle it? Absolutely. In fact, think about this too. There are people who pay money to get scared, right? They're called horror films. And if you're a horror film fan, you're actually paying a theater money to go sit in a room, in a dark room, and to have things pop out on screen and scare the crap out of you, right? So we can handle those very uncomfortable experiences. What's the difference between a horror film and a panic attack? In a horror film, you know why you're afraid because you just saw something on the screen. In a panic attack, sometimes these things just come out of the blue. And what do? We make a worst case scenario assumption. I must be dying. There must be something wrong with me or something like that. And the reality is that that's just simply not the case.
Just on that point, I'm curious, any thoughts on acceptance? I very much like the acceptance and commitment therapy, and it kind of fits in with that idea of learning to just be in the moment with the uncomfortable feelings. And any thoughts on acceptance?
Anybody who's doing good ERP is doing what ACT talks about. So if you look at ACT, I would say is another way to describe doing great exposure and response prevention therapy. I remember when ACT came out, and one of my friends, Michael Tuig, who was a student of Stephen Hayes, did a talk, and he talked about how this is ACT and how different it is from everything else. And I remember being in the audience, and I raised my hand, and I stood up. I said, Michael, I just want to thank you. I now know that I do ACT as well as ERP, because everything you just said, I do. I use a little different language than you do, but I do all of the things that you do in ACT by doing good ERP.
Wonderful. I've got a question here from some parent. Hi, is it normal for students to hate school for having too much work in the school?
Normal to dislike or hate school? Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a couple of kids every year that don't like school. So that happens all of the time. I would take a look at what is it that is leading to the hatred of school? Why don't they like school? What does too much work in school mean? I guess I would want to know what the meaning is behind that, and take a look at how do we figure out a better way to plan around doing the work that's required for school. I don't think it automatically means we need a 504 plan and decrease the work that my child gets. I think that it means figuring out, what is my kid doing when they get work? Are they spending an hour complaining about all the work they have, and then another hour avoiding doing the work, and then another hour of watching videos, and now it's 9 o'clock at night, and now it's crunch time, and all this work has to be done, but I didn't do anything during the day to get it done, but I sure as heck did a lot of stuff avoiding doing all of that work during the day. So then we might use something like the Premack principle. The Premack principle is an old psychological term. Premack was an early psychologist, and you can basically describe the Premack principle like something Pink Floyd once said in their songs, how can you have your pudding if you don't eat your meat? So you take a look at, you want a snack after school? Great. First, you must do half an hour of homework, then you get a snack. And then you want to be able to watch video games or play video games? Awesome. Show me an hour of homework done before you get the video game. And you make things that are highly reinforcing, like snacks and video games, occurrent upon the occurrence of a lower reinforcing behavior, which might be homework or something like that. And you stop having discussions about it as well, too. There are no more discussions about hating school and homework sucks and all those things. You've probably had the same discussion multiple times. In fact, for many families who have a worrier in their home, I suggest a worry book. And the worry book is a book on the dining room table. And if a worry comes up, then you as the parent write down that worry and write down your answer to it. And if your kid ever has that worry again or wants to have the same conversation they've had numerous times again, you just point to the worry book and say, you know what, we went over that one already, and we've actually put it in the worry book. You can just go read it there because my answer hasn't changed.
So you're really dealing with, again, with the worry as a patterned response. Child's in a
Totally.
state of arousal. The parent either reinforces the arousal or helps them move past it.
I mean, think about it. All interactions are stimulus response, right? So if I've provided you a certain stimuli and you give me a certain response and it makes me feel better, I'm going to keep providing that stimuli to keep getting that same response. If you change your response, now I have to change my stimuli if I want to feel better, right? And sometimes we're going to get to a point of, how do I feel better? I learn to feel better by feeling uncomfortable and learning how to handle being uncomfortable instead of constantly being given safety behaviors.
It's very helpful. Yeah, so it sounds like one of the things, of course, is we're also talking about a fair level of self-awareness on the part of the parent to realize their own anxiety.
Yeah, because sometimes parents are anxious to have children who are anxious, right? They don't want that experience. They want their child to be comfortable at all times. They think that that's the best possible thing that we can have happen, is to have a very comfortable child. And I would contend that that's not always the very best thing to have happen, right? You're you're probably better off having a kid who learns how to handle being uncomfortable than a kid who is always comfortable, because the kid who is always comfortable is always going to want to do whatever they can to be immediately comfortable. And the kid who knows how to handle feeling uncomfortable is the kid who can go on and do adventures and try new things and not require hand holding through the entire experience. And when they fall, gets themselves back up and tries it again, and doesn't need everyone telling them that they're going to be fine or okay all the time. I mean, I always love watching a 3-year-old fall, right? If a 3-year-old falls and nobody's seen them fall, they get back up and they just go run again. But if a 3-year-old falls and looks around and sees their mom or dad and they're like, then that kid is like, ah! And they start screaming and crying, right? Why? Because they know they're going to get reinforced for that experience. That's why. But if there's nobody there to do it, very often they just pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and keep on going and doing what they were doing. So that kind of thing just kind of carries over for people. And there's a lot of parents who are uncomfortable seeing their children be uncomfortable. I mean, many generations have said the next generation should have it easier than I had it. I don't think any generation needs to have it easier than we have it even 1 or 2 generations ago, right? Just look at some studies. There were some studies done in the 70s in some small towns out on the Northeast, where a sociologist went into a town for a summer, and everybody in the town knew this was happening. And that sociologist just monitored the children of that town, what they did, how much time they spent outside versus inside, how far they traveled all day long and everything. And back then it was like kids traveled on an average, a couple of miles a day. They got on their bikes, they rode their bikes around, they walked to their friends, they went down to the water hole, they swam and everything like that. Parents had no idea where their children were or anything. There were no phones or anything like that. Now, kids barely leave the house. They're only on video games. They don't actually interact individually with people or as a group. They only interact through electronic means. And there's not a lot of socialization that's going on, which means kids aren't presented with opportunities to do things the way that we were presented to doing. I mean, when I was growing up, my parents had no idea where I was throughout the day in the summer. I left after breakfast. I came home for lunch. I left after lunch. I came home for dinner. And then I was home by the time the streetlights came on. And that was the rule. My parents had zero idea where I was. If I was on my bike, I was on my bike riding around somewhere. They had no idea where I was, and they didn't have a phone or anything like that to be able to track me or anything of that nature. And I seem to have turned out rather okay, right? Now I don't have children, but my sister does, and now we do things like play dates where we find the most Clorox wiped house that we possibly can, and that's where we send everybody to. And now we don't even do them anymore with COVID, but I'm talking about pre-COVID ideas. And there's always a parent who kind of lurks around to make sure the kids aren't arguing with each other or anything like that. No one did that when I was a kid. We fought each other and we figured it out. And sometimes we went to Dukes and sometimes, we talked it out, but whatever, but we learned how to solve problems. But when you've got a parent who's always there to kind of rescue all the kids and tell everyone how to do something, and this is the directions and everything like that, kids don't learn how to solve problems anymore. They wait for someone else to do it. Now we get into the job world and it's like, we're hiring a bunch of people who don't know how to do things, who go to their bosses constantly and say, tell me how to do this and I'll do it, because that's what they've learned, that's the way that you do things. You're told how to do it and you follow the directions and you do it that way. And I want to see kids back again to what it was like, a couple of generations ago, where yeah, they figure things out on their own and they learn how to do it. And yeah, they make mistakes, but they get back up and they handle it, and those kinds of things, which I think are so important, but we lose more and more all the time.
I have another question here. Um, with everybody having a different feeling perception about COVID, how should actually the person change? How can parents find a good long-term balance between educating their school-age children on COVID fears and precautions versus allowing their kids to form their own feelings, beliefs with the current social media and or mainstream media alarmism? So
Sure. Well, number one, cut off the media as much as you possibly can about COVID, and there's no reason to watch the news these days, and just your kids don't need to be, kind of on all of that and just constantly every day things that are just scary, scary stuff. That's number one. Uh, Number two, I would also kind of have a discussion time. Hopefully families are home now and maybe you're eating dinner together every day that you didn't do before. So you have some time to turn off all media and have family discussions about what has anyone heard? Anybody have questions? Let's take a look at it. Here's the best information that we have right now. You may hear other things, but this is the information that we as a family are going to go with. This is what the disease is. This is what they're working on for a vaccine. These are the things that we're going to do as a family. If we do go out together, we all are going to wear masks. That's just a rule. Here's how we're going to interact with grandma or grandpa because they might be health compromised. So we'll be outside while they're inside the screen porch, and we'll talk to them through the screen or something like that. And you just kind of establish this is how our family is approaching this.
that's great. I mean, so it sounds like, and I think it is very effective. What you're saying really does work, which is around COVID, which is have that conversation and sort of agree on a single source, as you said. Agree on what it is that you as a family are going to do to keep everyone safe, and to have that conversation in very direct. But I actually liked it when you said the kids don't need to constantly be on the news and hearing so many different varied approaches to what's happening that they're just confused.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Hmm.
We just have a minute here more, and I hate that this is probably a bigger topic than really you can do in 2 minutes or so, but can you just say something really quickly about when is medication something that people should be considering? I know sometimes parents will maybe in some cases move too quickly to talking to the pediatrician. Some parents may wait too late, and then
Yeah,
the avoidant behaviors are much more deeply entrenched.
sure.
Anything about medication?
So a couple of things on meds. Number one, the American Psychiatric Association guidelines state that the preferred treatment for OCD and really anxiety is exposure and response prevention therapy or exposure and response prevention therapy plus medication. They don't recommend medication alone. So that right off the bat, don't just do meds alone. Therapy is the first thing to try out more than anything else. Number two, one of the reasons maybe meds are suggested is because you're doing a therapy that's not really helpful. So make sure the therapy is an exposure and response prevention kind of therapy, not a talk therapy, because talk therapy doesn't really work for anxiety disorders. Number three, give the therapy a bit of time to work first. So if you're doing ERP, allow for that to experience to kind of work and settle in before you would go toward meds. Number four, recognize that meds are not a quick fix, right? While when SSRIs came out, we were originally told that it was a 2-week turnaround to see effects from SSRIs. Now we know it's more like a 6 to 8 week turnaround for SSRIs. So that is something to pay attention to as well. Recognize with kids, there's a lot of black box warnings for SSRIs too. They could actually increase suicidal thinking for kids and adolescents. So it's something to weigh, especially if there's some co-occurring depression that's going on in the situation as well. And finally, if you're going to do SSRIs, that's probably the way to go more so than benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines like Xanax and Klonopin, while they work amazingly well, are not the way to go because they work so amazingly well. And because they work so amazingly well, they become highly addictive to people. And those are the drugs that actually have very high dangerous withdrawal symptoms and things of that nature, and can be very addictive to people as they get older. And now you kind of learn, I can't live my life without taking Xanax or Klonopin all of the time. So, go for the mildest medications possible as you start medication, not for the big hitters like Xanax and Klonopin and other benzodiazepines, since they have such high addictive potentials.
So listen, it looks like we're about at the end of our time, and I want to thank you, Dr. McGrath, so much for this great workshop. I like a very practical approaches to how to deal with issues regarding anxiety with your children and within the family. So in a moment here, we're going to finish up. Dr. McGrath, I was wondering if you could hang on just a moment. I do have a quick question for you I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind. But otherwise, folks, listen, thank you again so much for coming this evening. We will be, I have been recording this. It usually takes us about a day or two, but we will be posting on our website. If you have a friend, a parent that missed this, please have them watch it. And please feel free to join us in December for our workshop on parenting through grief. So otherwise, thank you so much, and everybody have a wonderful evening. Thank you.